Hi, hello viewers, it's Myla Minute IAS Academy and today we are going to see about inflation. So earlier we have seen about national income, we have seen about the basics of economy, colonial economy, mixed economy, we have seen economy planning, we have discussed about the 5-year plan, we have also discussed about the planning commission Niti Aayog. So now let us see about inflation. So what is this inflation? So inflation is nothing but the persistent rise in price level is called as inflation. So persistent rise in price level. What is this persistent rise? Say you are buying a milk packet for rupees 20 today and tomorrow the price has been hiked to 30 and day after tomorrow the price is hiked to 60. So there is a persistent price increase in price level in all the commodities. There is a persistent rise. So this persistent rise is called as inflation. So now currently India's inflation is around 7.6 percentage. So approximately it is around 7.6 percentage and this persistent increase is called as inflation. So it reduces this persistent increase in price level will reduce the purchasing power. How it reduces? Let us say onions. So earlier there is a price in onion price, right? So before that we had onion price around 40 rupees say, and after some time the onion price is hiked and the prices became 200. So if it becomes 200, more amount of people cannot buy this onion in this price of 200 rupees. They can't afford 200 rupees. So because of this, the purchasing power of the people is reduced. Because of this inflation only, the purchasing power of the people is reduced, right? So purchasing power will be reduced by this inflation. And also this inflation can lead to many problems. It can lead to unemployment. Many problems can be induced by this inflation, and this inflation is mainly because of the money supply increase. More money in the market. Say if a person is having 10,000 as the salary, then he can spend only that 10,000. Suddenly if his salary becomes 1 lakh, then he has an ability to spend that 1 lakh, right? So he has the ability to buy commodities in a very large price also. Then the commodity price will also increase. So this will make the money to lose its value. This is called as inflation. So let us discuss this in detail. So there is a thing between demand and price. So if there is a decrease in demand, then there is increase in price. So how it is means, so the onion price has been increased. So the onion price is increased, so the demand will be reduced. So more people can't afford this onion in this price and the demand for this onion will be reduced. If the onion is sold for 1 rupee, say if the onion is sold for 1 rupees, then all the people will demand it. Why? Because the price is reduced. So if the price is reduced, the demand will be increased. So if the if the price is increased, the demand will be reduced. This is the relationship between demand and price. So we have seen what is inflation. So it is the persistent increase in price level. So if the government, the RBI is the one who is printing the money, right? If suddenly RBI prints more amount of money, more amount of rupees, then automatically the value of the money will be reduced and automatically inflation will start to exist. This is all what is inflation. So there are certain terms which are relating to inflation, and those are, first let us see a curve. So this is a curve. In this curve, this is inflation. So up to this is inflation. The persistent rise in price level, right? The price has been increasing. So this is the normal price level. So say the normal price is 100 rupees. So there is a persistent rise in price level and it has reached 1000 rupees. So this curve is inflation. Then the prices is being reduced and it is brought to the normal level. So it is brought to this point, and from this to this it is called as disinflation. So what is this disinflation? Disinflation is nothing. It means inflation coming down but not in negative level. It is coming down to the normal level but not in negative level. It means disinflation. So after here, it has reached its normal value. After it, suddenly it start to decrease below its original value. Actually, it is 100 rupees. It start to decline and it has reached around 10 rupees, which means that this curve is deflation. So deflation is opposite to inflation, decrease in the price of goods than its original level. So the original price is 100, decrease in the price of goods than its original price is deflation. It is exactly opposite to that of inflation. So you might think that deflation is good, because if a milk is sold for 20 rupees, say, suddenly if it is sold for 2 rupees, it is good. You might guess, but it is not. Actually, certain amount of inflation is necessary, because inflation is good for the producers, whereas deflation is good for the consumers, because we are consumers, we are consuming the milk. If the prices have suddenly fall down, we will be benefited by this deflation. But the producers who are producing this milk can't handle this deflation thing. So inflation is necessary for producers, whether deflation we need. So certain amount of inflation will help the producers. So inflation certain amount is good, but deflation, it will affect the producers actually. Then after deflation, again the deflation from this negative level, again it is recovering back and it is reaching the normal level, and this is called as reflation. So reflation means the prices level go down to negative level. After this, government will try to increase the price level. So the government is trying to increase the price level, and that is called as reflation. So these are the terms which are in inflation. So another one term is stagflation. So what is this stagflation? Stagflation is nothing but stagflation is inflation plus unemployment. So inflation plus unemployment gives stagflation. So currently we have in India, we have both inflation as plus unemployment, which means that we are in stagflation stage. And another one thing is the reasons for inflation. What are the major reasons for inflation? So the major reasons for inflation is, one is demand pull inflation, another one is cost push inflation. So there are two reasons. One is demand pull, another one is cost push. So first let us discuss what is this demand pull inflation. So first let us see demand pull. So in this demand pull, there is a mismatch between the demand and the supply. So there should be certain amount of demand, and based on the demand only supply should be there. If there is a mismatch between the demand and the supply, then it is called as demand pull inflation. So first in this, let us see about population. So if the population will also affect the inflation. Say if there is a sudden increase in population, if there is a sudden increase in people, then the demand will automatically increase, right? The demand for one person and the demand for 100 persons is different. So if the number of people increases, then automatically the demand will also increase. Then in that time, if the demand has been increased, and during that time if the supply is same, if the supply has not been changed, then it will cause inflation. So say only 100 onions are produced inside our city. So there is a city in which 100 people live. So 100 is the population, in which the supply is 100 onions. So 100 onions are necessary for this 100 people, and suddenly many people came to that particular city. So there is a migration and many people came. 1,000 people are now in that city, but the supply of onion is same. The onion production has not been increased. Then the demand increases. So this demand increases, which affects the inflation. So all need that 100 onions. So this will affect the price. So demand means they all need, but not everyone can afford. So suddenly what they will do, this 1,000 people are in need of this 100 onions. So what they will do is, they will increase the price. So they will increase the price, and automatically what will do, the demand will fall down. So first, when there is 100 onion and 100 people, the price of the onions will be around 20 rupees, say. Suddenly many migrated and 1,000 people arrived. So now there is a shortage of onions. During that period, during this shortage, suddenly they will increase the price of the onions. So by this increase in price, suddenly the demand will fall down. By this increase in price, it causes inflation. So this is what is seen in population. So if there is a population increase, suddenly demand will increase. If there is a demand in increase and the supply is same, suddenly they will increase the price. By the increase in price, suddenly the demand will fall down, and this will cause inflation. So this is one thing. And another one is Government increases the expenditure. Government increases expenditure. How government increases the expenditure? The spend. The expenditure is the amount that government is spending. So if suddenly government increases the expenditure, say government started to build many buildings. So it has started to develop its infrastructure. So infrastructure is developing. So which means they are starting to build more roads, more dams, buildings. So infrastructure is development. So in this infrastructure development, automatically it will generate employment. Employment will be generated, right? So to build a building, it needs around 100 men or 1000 men, right? So this 1000 people will get a job opportunity. So suddenly employment rises. By this employment rises, everyone will get money, right? So by this they will get a salary and the money supply in market will increase. So by this increase in money supply, it can cause inflation. So too much of money in supply is called as inflation. Like because of the too much of money supply in the market, it can cause inflation. So this can result in inflation. So if the government increases the expenditure, say infrastructure, so by increasing the infrastructure, more amount of employment will be generated. By this employment, money supply will be increased in the market. Because of the increase in money supply in the market, this can lead to inflation. So example for this is 7th 5-year plan. During the 7th 5-year commission, the salary has been increased. During this period, the salary has been increased. By this increase in salary, the money supply has been increased in the market. Because of the increase in money supply, inflation has increased. So this is one example. So this is also demand pull inflation. Then another one thing is black money. So if there is more black money in the market, this also increases the money supply, right? So this black money will increase the money supply, and then automatically it will increase if there is more money in the market, it will increase the purchasing power of the people. So this increase in purchasing power of the people of the black money. So black money holders will have more purchasing power. So this will affect the cost of the product. So the cost of the products will be increased. So cost of the products will be increased. This will lead to inflation. So the purchasing power of the black money holders will be increased. So because of this, the cost of the products will be increased. Because of this, inflation will happen. And the next thing is more money supply. If RBI started to print more money, then automatically inflation will exist. If there is more money supply in the market, then automatically inflation will exist. These are the things which come under the demand pull inflation. So next one is cost push inflation. Next one is cost push inflation. So cost pushes, it is because of the cost. So second reason is cost push. In cost push inflation, the input cost or the raw material cost increases. Say the raw material cost has been increased. So if the raw material cost is increased, then automatically the price of the product will automatically increase. Price of all products will increase. The raw material cost has been increased means. So if the price of the product is increased, then automatically inflation will exist, right? So inflation will come into scene. For example, rubber production. So let us say rubber production. The rubber production has been decreased. So if the rubber production is decreased, there is little amount of production. So which means then automatically they will increase the price. The price of the rubber will be increased. So if the price of the rubber is increased, rubber is the raw material for manufacturing a tire. Say the price of the rubber is increased, then automatically the price of the tire will also increase, then automatically inflation. So likewise, if the raw material of all the products has been increased, then automatically inflation will exist. This is cost push inflation. So these are the topics of inflation. These are the reasons for inflation. Then we have effect of inflation. Because of this inflation, what is happening? Effect of inflation. So the effect is, first one is, it erodes the purchasing power. The purchasing power of the people will be so much affected. So say the price of the product has been increased. So if a onion is selling for 200 rupees, say, if onion is selling for 200 rupees, most of the poverty line people, most of the people who are below poverty line can't afford this onion for 200 rupees. Most of the people who are living in middle class can't afford this 200 rupees of onion. So even if they want it so necessary, they will buy just half a kg. They will reduce their consumption. So it will reduce the consumption. So onion is necessary for cooking. So if the price of the onion is hiked, we will buy 2 kgs. Say if you are buying 2 kgs daily, if the onion price is so high, then you will buy just 1 kg. So you have reduced your consumption. So it will reduce the inflation will reduce the consumption. Then it increases the gap between the rich and the poor. How it increases? Actually, if the onion price is high, it will affect the poor much, because for rich, affording this 200 rupees is not a big deal. They will buy it. So the gap between the rich and the poor will widen. So the gap will increase. And then it reduces the employment and growth. It also affects the employment. It will create unemployment. So it will affect the employment as well as the growth of the country. So because of this inflation, we will have all these effects. And let me ask a question. So if you have, there are two types of people, borrower, lender. So for whom inflation is good, for whether it is for borrower or lender? Actually, inflation is good for borrower. How is, if you have borrowed, say if you have borrowed 1000 rupees. So if you have borrowed 1000 rupees means you need to give them back 1000 rupees. In that 1000 rupees, you can do more things today. So if there is inflation tomorrow, in this 1000 rupees, you can just buy a cup of coffee. So if you give back the 1000 rupees during the period of inflation, the money has lost in its value. You will have more amount of money in your hand. The value of the money will be reduced. So by this 1000 rupees, today you can do much things, and during that period you have borrowed the money, and after, during the point of inflation, if you give back that money, with the help of that 1000 rupees, the lender who lended the money can just buy a cup of coffee. So the lender will be affected by this inflation, whereas the borrower will not be affected by this inflation. So the biggest money lender of any country is bank. Bank are the biggest money lender. So the bank will be very much affected by this inflation. Then we have inflationary gap. So what is this inflationary gap? If the government expenditure is more than the national income, it is inflationary gap. The spending of the government is government expenditure. If the government spend more than its income, if the government spend more than its income, then it is called as inflationary gap. What is deflationary gap? It is just opposite to that of inflationary gap. In deflationary gap, the government spend lesser than, the government's expenditure is low. The shortfall in government spending is called as deflationary gap. Then we have two ways of inflation. The two ways of inflation are, there are two ways of inflation. There are two ways of inflation. One is headline inflation, another one is core inflation. You can say inflation in these two ways. So one is headline inflation. Headline inflation is the normal inflation. If you normally say inflation, if there is a normally inflation, the word inflation is in news means, it means headline inflation. And another one inflation called as core inflation. So what is this headline inflation? In headline inflation, the inflation including the food and energy. So food and energy is included in this inflation. So why we are talking about food and energy means the inflation in food and energy is more. So food and energy, the price of food and energy is volatile, because say the onion price today and the tomorrow is not same. The tomato price today and the tomorrow is not same. It is daily changing. And energy also, say petrol, the price of the petrol is daily changing, right? So it is so volatile. But if we calculate inflation by adding the inflation of food and energy, then it is called as headline inflation or normally inflation. If I say core inflation, if the inflation is calculated excluding the food and energy, then it is called as core inflation. So because food and energy is more volatile, it has more inflation. So because if we add food and energy, it is called as headline inflation. If we exclude the food and energy, it is called as core inflation. There are two ways to measure inflation. Those are, one is inflation measuring methods. There are two ways. One is CPA and another one is WPA. So one is WPA. WPA means wholesale price index, whereas CPA means consumer price index. Second one is CPA. CPA means consumer price index. So these are the two methods to calculate inflation. Say a product has been produced in a factory. A product has been produced in a factory. So in a farm, say let us assume a farm. So this is a farm in which onion is produced. Let us take onion itself. In this farm, onion is produced. And this onion is procured and it is kept as in a wholesale unit. This is wholesale unit. And this wholesale unit sell the onion for many retailers. So many retailers buy this onions from this wholesale unit and this retailer will sell the onion to their consumers. So these are the consumers. So if the inflation is calculated here, it is called as wholesale price index. If the inflation is calculated right here, the consumer side, then it is called as consumer price index. So this is what? So if it is calculated in the wholesale term, it is called as wholesale price index. If it is calculated, yes, it is called as consumer price index. Say for wholesale price index, have a basket. So this is the current year 2021. In this we have added all the products. So the products, the price of all the product has been added. So you are having car, chocolate, everything is kept and the price is calculated and the value is calculated. It will be calculated by the Office of Economics. So wholesale price index, the goods and products and the goods will be kept in a basket and it will be measured and calculated by the Office of Economic Advisor. So Office of Economic Advisor is the one who calculate, and the main point relating to WPA is here services is not added. So service. So we have doctor as a service. We have many services, right? The service industry, IT. This service industry is not added here, which means that we have primary sector, secondary sector, tertiary sector. So in tertiary sector also called as service sector. We have many services under that and those services are not added while calculating this inflation based on this WPA method. So it will be compared with the base year. So say the base year is 2011 to 12. So 2011 to 12 is the base year and it will be compared with the base year. In compare and they will say the inflation. So based on its comparison, they will calculate and they will say the inflation that the price, that the inflation is around 10%. So wholesale price is measured. Wholesale price will be used here. So the wholesale price of a shirt may be 50 rupees, but the selling price will be 500 rupees. The wholesale price will be used and the inflation will be calculated. In WPA, it is on producer level. Okay. Coming to consumer level. So consumer level, it is based on the consumer. CPA is based on consumer. So here also it will be compared. Here also it will be calculated. And they will say inflation. And what method which we are currently using is CPA only. CPA is currently used by India. India is currently using CPA to calculate the inflation because CPA is more precise. CPA is more precise than compared to that of WPA because in CPA services are added. We include services here. So in CPA we have, CPA will be divided into three. One is CPA for industrial workers. CPA for industrial workers will be calculated by Labor Bureau. Labor Bureau will calculate it. And second one is CPA for agri and rural level. Agri and rural level will be calculated by the Central Statistical Office. So CSO is the one who calculates this CPA for agri and rural level. And third one is CPA for rural and urban livelihood. This will also be calculated by the CSO only, Central Statistical Office, and these three will be summed up and calculated by the Central Statistical Office. For this CPA, for this WPA 2011 to 12 is the base year, for this CPA 2016 is the base year for CPI. So currently India is using it. It will give precise calculation. Generally, if we say inflation in percentage, then they say it in CPI terms only. So if they say WPA inflation only, then it is calculated based on WPA. Then there are certain types in inflation, and those types are. So here in CPA, services are added. That is one important point. Whereas in WPA, services are not added. That is why we calculate our inflation based on CPA only. There are certain types in inflation. One is creeping inflation. Creeping inflation is inflation in single digits. Say 6% inflation, 7% inflation means creeping inflation. Second one is we have galloping inflation. So certain amount of inflation is actually necessary. So creeping inflation is not bad actually. Then we have galloping inflation. Galloping inflation, this is a mild inflation. So it will act as, this mild inflation means creeping inflation is a mild inflation, but as galloping inflation is higher compared to that of creeping inflation, and it is a double digit inflation, 20% inflation, 30% inflation. So this is galloping inflation. And the third one is hyperinflation. It is the most worst case. So creeping inflation is mild and it is actually okay. It acts as an incentive for the producer. But galloping inflation is bad compared to that of creeping. It has two-digit number of inflation. So 20% inflation, 30% inflation. In hyperinflation, we have trillion level, billion level inflation is called as hyperinflation. So these are certain types of inflation. In our next video, let us see about how we can control the inflation. So let us discuss those things in our next video. Subscribe to My Minute IAS Academy. Thank you.